Did Ford Australia actually produce an AU Falcon GT40? Well, okay. We clickbaited you. Ford did not make an AU Falcon GT40. Sorry about that, but before you unsubscribe and block us, let us explain a little more. Before the Tickford AU TS series, Ford did actually produce a V8 Falcon that was better than the AUX i8. Let's find out what it was. The Ford AU series, launched in September 1998, included models like the Falcon and Fairmont, replacing the EL Falcon. It was marketed with the slogan, "I've come a long way, baby," highlighting its advancements. However, the reception was divided, with praise for engineering, but criticism for styling. The top sports variant of the new range was the Falcon XI8 with a 5-liter Windsor V8 producing 185 kilowatts, or 248 horsepower. Very conservative considering arch-rival Commodore with the VT series was released a year earlier with the HSV 5-liter V8 producing 195 kilowatts. The following year, in July 1999, the newly formed Ford Tickford Experience, FTE, did launch higher specification and performance models known as the T-Series, later known as T1, with their 5-liter V8 producing 200 kilowatts in their Falcon variants being the TE50 and TS50. However, the previous month saw the VT Commodore Series 2 release with the upgraded LS1 5.7-liter Chevrolet V8 producing 220 kilowatts in its basic detuned guise. On a side note, this was Ford Australia's continued fault since making the decision to discontinue V8 variants when they introduced the XF in 1984. They were always one step behind the Commodore in engine performance right up till Ford stopped Australian production in 2016. That's the short version of the scenario surrounding the rest of this story. Later in the video we will get to the rumors and speculation, but for now at this time with Ford there was something else happening with the release of the AU Falcon. And no, we are not talking about the most famous and beloved taxi model in Australian history. From 1988, beginning with the EA series, Ford introduced an option pack officially identified on the vehicle ID tag as OP20, short for Option 20. This option pack was introduced specifically for vehicles that were ordered by state police departments, which consisted of taking an existing variant of Falcon and adding the Option 20 pack. The option pack was tailored for each body style, whether the ute or panel van or wagon, but it was a sedan that received the full performance pack, as it was the last line of defense against a speeding car attempting to evade the law. These sedans were the then modern-day Super Pursuits, the interceptors in the real world. By the time the AU series came into production in 1998, Ford had early orders from all state police departments. These were the details of the Option 20 package for the sedans. And although most of these sedans began as the top sports variant of the newly released AU range, being the Falcon XI8, to make it easier to comprehend, we will compare them as XI8 versus OP20. We will get to the engine last, but we'll start with the transmission. The XI8 had a 4-speed auto or optional 5-speed manual. The OP20 had only the 4-speed auto. However, it was recalibrated for higher RPM shifts. The XI8 had a factory-fitted transmission cooler integrated into the radiator. The OP20 had a higher volume factory-fitted transmission cooler to enhance durability during high-speed pursuits or prolonged use. The XI8 had the limited slip differential with a ratio of 3.45 to 1. The OP20 also had the same differential. The XI8 had the sport suspension as opposed to other variants. The OP20 had the sport suspension but with further stiffened for the highest stability possible. The XI8 had the ECU calibrated to meet its more sporty persona. The OP20 had the ECU modified to remove the standard 180 km speed limit, replacing it with a 225 km limit and adjusting gear shift points for high performance, which was crucial for police pursuit capabilities. The XI8 had the standard sports instrument cluster, which was basically cosmetically different to the Fairmont variant to make it appear more sporty. The OP20 had a police-specific instrument cluster, which included finer speedometer increments of 2 kilometers, plus a hidden speedo mode for adjusting the speedometer reading, accommodating different wheel sizes. The XR8 had standard interior lighting as per all other variants. The OP20 had additional interior lights for visibility during night operations and equipment checks, plus a singular button mounted on the dash to kill all interior lights regardless of settings, enhancing stealth during police work. The XR8 had standard wiring as per all other variants. The OP20 had heavy-duty wiring to support more lighting and other police equipment. So that was most of the Option 20 features regarding the sedans, but other features were available depending on body style and usage requirements, such as sump guards or off-road or country locations, deleted bench seat middle seat belts, and other specific items and features. Basically, the OP20 Ford vehicles were superior to all other models and makes by way of their durability. Now let's get to the engine, and let's get to the rumors and speculation. It is believed by many Ford enthusiasts that upon the release of the Ford AU series and the initial orders by the police force for Option 20 versions, that a very small number of these initial Option 20 sedan vehicles actually received the leftover engines from a previous model, the ELGT, which was the top sports variant. These were leftover short motors that had not been needed due to the ELGT exceeding its production target of 250. So another 30 or less engines were produced, but the demand stopped at 272 units. This left a small number of short motors and bits unused. But what made the ELGT engine so special? Well, the EL Series XR8s had the same V8 engine that was rolled over to the next Series AU Falcon, producing 185 kilowatts, or 248 horsepower. But the GT variant had a Tickford Vehicle Engineering Ford SVO GT 45-liter V8, producing 200 kilowatts, or 268 horsepower, of power due to the special SVO GT 40-cylinder heads, a high compression ratio of 9.0 to 1, large valves, heavy-duty valve springs, roller cam followers, fuel injection with a large throttle body and exhaust extractors. The story is that these engines left over from the ELGT were placed into base model AU Falcons, along with the rest of the Option 20 items, the base model being the Falcon Forte. The reason for this placement was due to the XR8 already having a factory-fitted V8, but for the base model Forte, the inline 6 was a factory standard with customers required to select the V8 option if desired. Needless to say that very few, if any, Forte variants were optioned with a V8 due to customers simply picking the variants with factory V8s, being the Fairmont or XR8. But for reasons now lost to time, Ford supplied a small amount of Fortes to the police force with the V8 option, and more so they appeared to supply them mostly, if not exclusively, to the Western Australia Police Force. It is believed that there was less than 10, likely 5 or 6 of these Option 20 vehicles produced with a 200 kilowatt GT engine. If true, this means that for 6 months, until the TS series, that these Falcons were the king of Ford Australia's performance vehicles. In addition to the Option 20 items and the GT engine, more than the XR8, these Fortes also had single 3-inch exhaust system with a high-flow Lukey muffler and a higher capacity brake booster for harder stops, and the more durable steel chaser wheels, and a live rear axle. It could be argued that all this means nothing when the then HSV GTS with its 355-stroker was making 220 kilowatts, but we would argue back that the GTS could not likely outrun and outlast these OPT 24 days throughout the streets of a hot city. But this remains to be seen. Interestingly, when these Fortes came to the end of their police service at around 50,000 kilometers, they were not scrapped, but all the police equipment was removed, and they were sold off cheap as no more than base model Falcons to the unsuspecting public, as they retained all their normal Forte badging. There was no more than a small V8 badge on both fenders to distinguish them from their 6-cylinder brothers. And by this time, the Series 2 AUs had been released, including the TS Performance variants, but even the Series 2 Fortes were much nicer with a small interior and exterior facelift. The old kings of the streets were forgotten, with only a small number of enthusiasts keeping their memory alive. Adding to the wider car community's lack of remembrance of the AU Option 20 vehicles was a continued questioning as to whether high-performance vehicles were even necessary for police work. The practice of police high-speed pursuits had long been a topic of concern in Australia due to safety risks for both officers and the public. Early data from the Australian Institute of Criminology highlighted a shift in the 1990s, with most deaths in police custody occurring through pursuits rather than in stations. A 2003 report in Alternative Law Journal by Darren Palmer, titled Hot Pursuit: Law Enforcement Practice in the Public Interest, noted that pursuits often involve young male drivers for minor offenses, raising questions about necessity and risk. The Crime and Corruption Commission in Queensland, through a 2003 report, recommended adopting more restrictive policies, particularly for traffic and driving offenses, which accounted for 50% of pursuits. This report suggested that prohibiting pursuits for these offenses could reduce their frequency by half, with further reductions possible by limiting pursuits for stolen vehicles. The conclusion to backlash of high-speed pursuits was Ford Australia ending its Option 20 pack with the AU series. While pursuits still occur in Australia until this day, they aren't vehicles specifically made for the process, as most states' police departments limit their police officers to the speed limits, leaving them to rely more on coordinated efforts from multiple police vehicles rather than one-on-one pursuits. Okay, so that's the Ford 1998 AU Falcon Forte OPT20, not the Falcon GT40 we clickbaited you on, but still a very noteworthy vehicle in Australian motoring history. The question is, how do we recognize one of these unique Falcons? We must start with the identification plates. There are a few elements on the plates that must be exact. Firstly, the body identification plate definitely needs to state OPT20 under GVM. Secondly, the build date needs to be November 1998. And then model is 18933, and the engine is Z, trans is W, and paint is H. With the second compliance plate, the VIN number must start with this sequence of characters. And obviously the complete VIN must match the VIN on the body plate. And lastly, the seating capacity must be 5. Externally, providing nothing has been changed, the AU will have the whale mouth grille, small V8 badges on both fenders, steel chaser wheels, and Forte badges on the boot. Lastly, if the AU has logbooks, they should look almost identical to this. To conclude, even if they did not have the 200 kilowatt 5-liter, but the 185 as per the XI8, they were still a high-performance vehicle, a wolf in sheep's clothing, a sleeper in the second-hand market, an ugly sleeper, but a sleeper nonetheless. So ugly it was beautiful. Only 2 of these Ford 1998 Falcon Forte OPT20 pursuit vehicles are known to remain. It is likely that some of the other 5 or so are still out there, but their true identity is not known to the owners. If you enjoyed this video and like donuts, then hit like and subscribe to be notified of more. Until next time, stay safe on the roads.